Hey Stampers, Kim from stampingimperfection.com. Welcome to my craft room. I wanted to share a video with you this week from my new video series called Technique a Week Beyond the Basics. This is the first week, and I hope to share a new technique with you every week. And the idea for this is that I want to do some techniques that are more than just like new stamper techniques, more than beginner stamper. Like if you consider yourself kind of an intermediate stamper or an advanced stamper, some of these techniques will be for you, definitely. And I started out by looking at some of the latest trends in stamping, and one of the trends I noticed was the black and white images, the outline images that you just stamp in black and white, and then you add either just a little bit of color or you add color in kind of random ways. So I made 4 different cards, and I thought I would share these cards with you. And in these cards I use some masking techniques, and I use some watercolor with ink techniques. I'm assuming that if you're more than a beginner, you will have some supplies on hand, like different color stamps, maybe some masking paper, or at the very least post-it notes or something like that. Maybe you have a bunch of supplies you're not sure how to use, or maybe even you want just more ideas to use the supplies that you have. So that's what this series is for. This is for you, just for that reason. So for this particular set of 4 cards, I'm going to share, I'm going to be using Catherine Pooler's inks, and I love her inks. The one ink I'm going to be using is the Midnight Black ink. This is an archival ink, and I really love this ink. It's great for watercoloring, it's great for alcohol marker coloring. It gives you a nice crisp black image. You can see that, and usually I only have to stamp it once. It's amazing. I get like perfect stamping the first time. And the other thing I like about it is that it is a nice detail ink. A lot of the fonts on the sentiments and stamp sets are very fine and tiny lately, and this ink will really give you a nice crisp image with those little details where you really need to see the spaces on small little stamps and fonts. So I really like this ink. This is one of my favorites, and that's the only archival ink she has. The rest of her inks are dye inks, which work perfectly for watercoloring with these inks. So one of the other trends I'm working with today is rainbows. Rainbows have been a big trend for a while, but I kind of wanted to create a rainbow palette. So I chose 3 inks. I chose her Daydream blue. I love her blues and greens. She's really got just a fantastic selection. But I decided to go with the Daydream ink. Then I chose Sauna. I picked a red, a blue, and a yellow. And I picked the Sauna yellow because it's like sunshine. It's just so bright and deep. It's beautiful. And with that Daydream, it'll give me a green shade. And then I wanted a red that wasn't really red, so I picked Peppermint Scrub. And that Peppermint Scrub with the Sauna will give me a more orange color when mixed together. So I'm going to try to go for that. And if the Peppermint Scrub and the Sauna mix, I'll get a little purple too. So you can see I've kind of embraced doing coloring in a random way. I've got lots of the black and white outline colors, and one of the reasons I wanted to do this, I love watercoloring, and the first way I ever learned how to watercolor was actually with my ink pads. I assume that if you are more than a beginner stamper, but maybe not quite an expert, that you would definitely have a supply of different ink pads in a variety of colors. You'll at least have a red, a yellow, and a blue, and a nice black ink pad that you like. It doesn't matter what brand you use the brand that you have. So I'm making some assumptions that you probably have the supplies that you'll need to make all these cards that I'm showing you today. Now, you might not have the same stamp set, you might not have these particular inks. Pull out what you have. The idea is to use this stuff on your shelf in your stash. And like right now we can't go out shopping really anyway, and some of the craft stores are being forced to close, during this whole coronavirus thing. So the idea is use what you have. So I'm using this Simon Says stamp set that I got from one of their monthly stamp kits, and I love this stamp set. I love these big floral images. I love the sentiments. This is called, what is this called? To find the name of it, it's Look for the Rainbow stamp set, and it's got several stamp sets. There's several sentiments in it. I like the variety of sentiments. I like that it's got big images I can color in different ways. And now if you have watercolors and you want to use them, you can use those watercolors. If you have distress crayons and you want to use those for this technique, you could do that. Or your real brush markers, or your regular Stampin' Write markers. You could use any of those. Anything that's dye-based that reacts with water, you could use those for this technique. So you don't, like the cards that I'm making today, you don't have to use your ink pads. You can use any watercolor medium that you want to, that you have on your shelf. So let's go ahead and get started and see what we can create. So I'm going to start with the first card. This one takes the longest to do. It's got the most steps, so that's why I chose this one. Notice that I put a nice cleanup mat below. Happens to be the Ken Oliver mat. And I took that Sauna ink. I usually start with my yellow, and I just squish it onto that mat. And now I'm using a piece of cellophane from a stamp wrapper, and I spritzed that ink with my distress sprayer, just with water, and then I picked up a big blob of that watered down ink and just then transferred it to my paper. This happens to be watercolor paper, and it's cut a little big, like 4 3/4 by 5 7/8 or something. I'll cut that down later. I'm going to do the same thing with the peppermint scrub, only I'm going to put a little less ink on this time. I usually only squish part of it, just like I did here, and then I spritz it with my distress sprayer that's just got water in it, and then I pick it up with that cellophane sheet. These are perfect. This is a great way to reuse these before you actually throw them in the garbage, and you can actually clean it off and use it several times. And I pick it up until I have enough that I want on there, and I try to get it so that the yellow and the red overlap, so I get a little orange band in there. And you'll notice that I dabbed up the big blotches. I don't always do that. Sometimes I leave those big puddles there and let it dry until let it go until it dries, so that I get different variations in color. I really like that. I'm going to repeat the same thing with the Daydream ink. I'm going to try to overlap that yellow because that's going to give me some green in there. And notice that there's lots of white space here. I do want some white space in this card. And if you don't want white space, fill the whole thing. The colors didn't blend together as much as I would have liked them. I have my fan on, so I think that it caused them to dry quicker and not blend so much. So I spritzed it some more, and I really tried to concentrate where the yellow and the blue and the red and the blue mixed, or red and yellow mixed, I'm sorry. And as soon as you spritz it, that will cause the dye inks to react, because water makes them react. And then once you blot it up, the reaction stops. So you kind of want to get it to where you want it to go. So I just want to quickly dry this with my heat tool. And you can see I have my Totally Tiffany embossing station, and I'm using a Wow heat tool. I really like this one because it's got a low setting, which I consider to be perfect for drying things like this. The high setting is perfect for embossing. I hit the back a little bit. I'm trying to keep this from warping too much. So I have decided that I want to just run this through my Big Shot machine so that paper is super flat. So I'm using my regular plates just like I would with any die cut, and I just put a piece of paper towel or a piece of copy paper over the top, or scrap paper, and run that through my machine. So I like to have a nice flat surface to stamp on, so this works perfectly to run it through your die cut machine like that. And you can run it just back and forth and it comes out nice and flat. Now I'm going to trim this down. This is my Tim Holtz guillotine trimmer. I really like this one. This is going to be trimmed down to be 4 3/4 by 3 1/2. And then I'm going to do some stamping on that surface. So now I have that nice flat surface to work on. I've created a card base with Neenah Solar White cut at 4 1/4 by 11, scored and folded at 5 1/2. And I'm just pulling out some of the images, the stamps that I want to work with here, and I'm just playing around with them, seeing how I want to put them together. Once I've fussed with where I want my stamps to go, I just ink up the ones that I want to appear to be in front of the other ones. So I'm using this big floral image. I want that one to look like it's in front of the others. I ink that up and the butterfly with that Catherine Pooler Midnight ink. Then I'm going to leave those stamps in place, and I'm going to do the same thing on my watercolor mat. Here's what you don't want to do. You do not want to tuck that into the corner. The card base was tucked into the corner when I stamped it, so this actually needs to be placed where it's going to go on the card base, which is 3/8 of an inch from the bottom and 3/8 of an inch from the side. So I want to be very careful about that. And then since I left those stamps in place, when I ink those up and stamp them and then go to place this piece on top of the other piece, you will see they will match up perfectly. So you want to be careful that you place this on your stamp positioner exactly where it's going to go relative to your card base. Okay, so I'm going to ink that up and it's perfect. So it's going to overhang just where I need it to. The next step is to make the masks that I think I'm going to need. So I pull out the 2 floral images because I'm thinking at this point I probably want to, I may want to put leaves on both sides. So I'm using the Gina K Masking Magic, and if you don't have this, you can use a Post-it note or you can use just regular copy paper. So I ink that up, and I am just going to take my little paper snips and I'm going to cut both of these images out. And I always cut inside the line so that when I place this down and then I go to stamp the next images, the lines from the new images meet the older image. And if they don't meet, I use my journaling pen to make sure they do. So now I'm going to put that watercolor piece back down and I'm going to place the mask over the flower. And you can see that black outline shows that's exactly what I want. And then I'm going to go ahead and place my other flowers, and again I want those to hang off because I want to get some of that black and white outline image. So that's going to hang off a little bit, and then I'm going to put the leaves on, and the leaves are going to hang off a little bit, although I wish I'd hung them off just a little bit more because only the tip of one shows beneath it. But then I'm going to go ahead and pick these up with my stamp positioner. This is one of the beauties of having a stamp positioner. Whichever one you have, you can do stuff like this, and it's so much easier than without one. But you can do this without it also. So I'm going to go ahead and ink those up with that Catherine Pooler Midnight Black. And I don't know if you've been noticing, I'm inking these once and stamping these once, even on that watercolor paper, and I'm getting perfect images. Like, this is one of the reasons I love this ink. Just beautiful. And my favorite part of masking is removing the mask, because when you remove the mask and the image does look like it's in front of the others, it's like, wow, I did it. I'm going to repeat the same process on the bottom. And notice, I did not remove the stamps from my stamp positioner. I left them exactly in place. So if you don't have a stamp positioner, you would need to use one of those Stamp-A-Majigs or something like that. Actually, Art Impressions makes a stamp positioner now too that's a lot like along the lines of the old Stamp-A-Majig. All right, so I'm going to ink these up. I'm going to stamp these just like I did on that watercolor piece, so that when I put that watercolor piece on top of these, they will exactly line up. And some of the stamped image will show on the card base, and it'll meet the card front there, and you'll see that in just a minute. Now for all of my cards, I've used this craft foam with double-sided sticky tape on both sides of the craft foam, and now I can place that card front on the card base, and I'm just going to line up the floral images once I get all the tape off here. And I usually end up fussing with it for a little while, but you can see how the outline image sticks out underneath this piece. And like, this is just one way to do this, like a few of the trends. Like, I'm combining the rainbow trend with the black and white outline trend, along with the watercolor trend, and adding your color in a pretty random fashion. So I really like the way this turned out. And I'll add some embellishments to this later, but first I need to add a sentiment. So I picked the Look for the Rainbows and sentiment, and I just stamped that in the same black ink on a piece of scrap paper, cut it at a jaunty angle, and attached it with foam tape. For the next 3 cards, I'm going to use this Bristol paper. I love this Bristol paper for using any kind of multimedia that I'm using. This is easy to find in my local craft stores. It's often on sale, so I really like this Bristol paper. I can get a lot of card fronts out of one piece of paper, so I feel like it's very cost effective, and it's going to handle the water that I'm using very nicely. So if if you want to do any kind of multimedia, this is actually really wonderful paper. So I am going to put this down, and I'm using my Altenew silicone mat, and I'm using this Post-it 3M removable labeling tape. I really like this. This is the 2-inch wide. They have other widths, and I'm just going to put this down so that I have a rectangle in the middle, and I'm using the grid mat so that I can see that the top and the bottom have the same amount of card base showing, and the left and right sides have the same amount as each other. Now that I have that just the way I want it, I can go ahead and do my smush technique. So I'm going to take my inks, and I'm just going to smush a little of the ink from the ink pad directly onto my craft mat. And this is a silicone mat, so this wipes off beautifully. And I'm just going to put a little bit of each one, and then I'm going to take out that distress sprayer and spritz each one so I can water it down a little bit, and then apply it with the same cellophane envelope that I used before. Now if you don't have the cellophane envelope, you can go ahead and use an acetate sheet, like an overhead transparency sheet. If you have those around, I happen to have a ton of those usually around, since I have so many left over from my teaching days. But you can see I'm just squishing this, and I squished it into the yellow and the blue together so I could get some green in this one. But then I overmixed it a little bit. So these are easy fixes. I can just go ahead and clean it off with just a rag, and I'm going to add a little bit more of that blue, that Daydream blue, that Catherine Pooler Daydream blue. And I want to get more blue now on the bottom. So again, I'm going to spritz it to water it down. And the water really helps it to move around on the paper, and you can really squish it, and you get variations in color. And on this one, mostly I'm going to leave those big puddles that you see there, because I like to have some darker spots, and those big puddles will give me darker spots. The only time I dab those up is if I left way too much, like in that one spot. I want to, get a little bit more blue in there. And sometimes in places where the colors are mixing together, if you get a big blob like that, it can end up looking brown if you're not careful, because you can get it too thick, or if you're not careful about what colors you're mixing together, it'll turn out like this big brown blob. So I'm being careful about what colors I'm mixing together here. So I'm going to clean that up, and now I'm going to play with the red, And I have that Peppermint scrub again that I'm using. I'm using the same colors on all of these cards, and I have no idea what this technique is called. In my head, I call it the squish technique. I can't remember. I know that Vicki Boutin did this in one of the scrapbooking classes that she did. And if you want to do this in your scrapbooks, this makes a beautiful background. I highly recommend Vicki Boutin's multimedia 12 by 12 white paper for this. You can get a whole pad of it, and it is fantastic for doing techniques using multimedia. And using watercolor is actually one of the multimedia that it works beautifully for. And again, for this technique, you can use any watercolor medium that you have. And if you don't have any watercolor mediums, you see that the inks, these dye inks, work beautifully. Dye inks react with water because I think they have a water base, and like dissolves like, so, or reacts with like, and you can actually get these beautiful techniques. Now I'm trying to put a little bit more yellow in because I got a lot of my yellow turned to orange with that peppermint scrub. And the only thing that I'm really trying to do on this piece is to make sure that I get that entire rectangle filled in. So I want to make sure I have the whole rectangle filled in. And when you put that tape down, you want to be very careful that you get the edges of that rectangle down, or this can run under. The color will run under that. I'm going to put that aside to dry, and I'm going to work on my third card. And for my third card, I'm going to pull out another piece of the multimedia mat. Now I have all of these cut at 4.5 by 4.25 by 5.5. And I'm just pulling that first card out to see where the image that I stamped was on the card, because that's the only part of this card that I want to color in. I want to leave the top left part of the card white, and I want to put the watercolor on the bottom right, like diagonally. So I just pulled that over to see where that was, and again, I'm squishing the colors onto my mat, spritzing them with the water from my distress sprayer, and now I'm going to add water to that card base just where I want the colors. And I usually do this with my brush, and I forgot to grab my water jar, so I'm just spritzing water on. I don't get quite enough on. You need a good puddle of water here. You don't want so much water that it soaks through your paper, but you want a nice amount of water. And I don't quite have enough, and you'll see that because the color doesn't spread as much and the water dries up pretty quickly. So when you have enough water, the colors will just naturally blend together. You won't have to do the work, the water will do the work, and that's not happening here. So I am going to spritz some more water on it to get those colors moving, and I'm going to spritz some water onto my mat to get it onto my brush because I forgot my jar of water. Usually I will get some clean water from my jar and cover the part of the Bristol paper that I want to have color on, and then drop the color in, and the color will just spread. But I didn't get enough water there. So you can spritz more water onto the paper, and you can put more water on your brush. That always helps. And just add more water to that paper. So I'm mixing the colors. The blue and the red will give me a little bit of purple. The red and yellow will give me some orange, and the blue and yellow will give me some green. So I'm kind of just trying to move them around because they're not moving on their own. I don't have enough water here. And to help it along, again, you can spritz, you can add more water to your brush. And mostly I just want to get that bottom diagonal corner filled in because this is where I want to stamp, and this is, this is actually where I want to concentrate my image. So here I'm going to spritz the all the color, especially on the end. I want it to look, watercolor has this really organic look because the water moves around. So I spritz the edge to really get that look, and then I spritz some of the boundaries where the colors are meeting so they mix together better. And then I'm going to put this aside, and I'm going to leave that pooling water. I'm going to put that aside to dry. And things are drying very quickly here today, as you can see. So now I'm going to pick up that first piece, and you can see I didn't get my edges down perfectly. Some of it kind of smushed under. I'm okay with that. I don't mind that it's not perfect, hence the imperfection. But I can cover that up too when I go to do my images. I can really cover that, and you won't even notice that imperfection. So I'm going to go ahead and pull out my MISTI and my masks, and I'm going to do exactly what I did on the other watercolor piece. This one I'm going to tuck all the way into the corner in case I accidentally lift it, because this is the card front. I'm going to attach this to a piece of craft foam and then to another card base. So I want that image I'm creating to overhang onto the white. So you notice there that I laid that first floral image down. This is the one I want to appear to be in front of the other, so I'm stamping this one first. And I let that overhang into the white space, and I'll move my MISTI up here in just a minute. So I'm going to ink this up, and again, with that Catherine Pooler ink, I'm inking that once, and it comes out beautifully. The Bristol paper is a really nice surface, so it's a super smooth surface. If you like to blend inks with your brushes or sponges, this is the perfect paper for that because it's so smooth. I think it's got like a vellum coated surface or something that makes it smooth. Now I'm going to put the mask on top of this, and I'm going to pull off that stamp that I just used and put the other ones down, and then just ink those up and stamp those over the top. Okay, so I can remove that original one and go ahead and put the other ones on. And I'm getting better about remembering to clean it off before I touch it. And you want to make sure your hands are clean. Baby wipes, having baby wipes handy is always good for that. And I'm just using my stamp chamois, and I usually use that to like just wipe off my hands. So I fuss with this a little bit. I want the image, the stamp, to overhang the white space because I want to have that trend of the black and white image. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and I've inked this up. My favorite part, removing that mask. And because I cut inside that mask, you can see how perfectly they overlap or appear to overlap. And then I'm just going to go ahead and stamp the Look for Rainbows. This is the same stamp sentiment that I used from the Look for Rainbows Simon Says stamp set. And this time I'm putting it in the upper left corner. I decided that I wanted it on the colored piece. And that's going to complete the card front, and I can go ahead and attach this to my craft foam and also my card base. That's going to complete this card, and I'll put this card aside and add embellishments later. I'm going to pull out the other card front that is now dry, and I cut this down to 4 by 5 1/4. And I'm trying to decide whether I want to put the floral part at the top or at the bottom. It doesn't really matter. I can actually decide that when I actually put the sentiment on is when I really need to make that decision. But now I'm going to do the same thing I did before. I'm going to place my big floral image first. That again is the one I want to appear in front, but I'm moving this out because I decide I want that to hang off a little bit, and I want to make sure all the images are actually going to fit inside the colored spot. Now I do have a little bit of that temporary adhesive underneath that card piece, so it's holding it. For some reason, I feel like the magnets don't always allow me to get a good stamped image, so I use that temporary adhesive a lot more. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to add the mask. I'm going to put the other stamps on top, and I'm going to then stamp those and then stamp my sentiment. So now I've done the stamping part of my head there. I've done the stamping with the masks, and I'm starting to notice my hands are getting pretty inky, so I have to be careful not to get my fingerprints all over. I'm adding a sentiment, and this time I'm using the Thinking of You sentiment from that same stamp set, and I'm adding the butterfly on this card because I do want some of that black and white outline image. I love the randomness of the colors here, and you could use any colors you wanted. You don't have to do the rainbow thing. Like, just do your own thing there. I'm going to add the craft mat and the card base, and all the card bases are 4 1/4 by 11, scored at 5.5, and those are the 3 cards I've completed so far. Now the last card is very quick, and it's my favorite one, and it doesn't have as much color. So now I'm using yet another piece of Bristol paper, 4 1/4 by 5.5, and this time I'm definitely going to put my stamped images at the top. I want to just change it up a little bit. I'm going to follow the exact same process that I've done for the other 3 cards. I'm going to ink this up, stamp my image that I want in front, add the mask, and you can see I've been reusing the same mask over and over. Place my other stamps down, and then I'm going to go ahead and stamp those, pull off the mask, and then I am going to add my color. This time I'm going to use a paintbrush. I'm going to use the same paintbrush I used before. And I forgot to say this, actually no I'm not. The other paintbrush was a number 12 round brush. It was a nice big brush because I was covering a big surface. This is a number 6 round brush, and I'm just adding 2 colors. I'm using the Peppermint Scrub and the Sauna. And notice that I put some water down. I squirted water onto my craft mat, and then I picked that water up with my paintbrush and added it just where I want the color to be. And then when I drop in the color, it sort of flows with the water, and it stops where the water stops. Now I'm going to drop in some of that Sauna color, and it'll mix and give me a really nice orange. And you can play with this, like you could let this layer dry, and then you could go in and just drop in some of the Sauna or some of the Peppermint Scrub and get, a different variation of colors. You could get some brighter reds in one spot. I didn't go to that much trouble. I just wanted a little bit of color on just part of the image, so I wasn't going to fuss with it a lot. I really love the color that I ended up with. And now I'm just going to add my sentiment. That's the last thing to do before I attach it to the craft foam and the craft mat. And I'm going to pick the somewhere over the rainbow sentiment and put it down there at the bottom corner. Like, I really love this card. I love the way it came out. And again, I left this piece cut at 5.5 by 4 1/4. And I put a craft mat underneath it, added it to the same size card base, 4.5 by 11, scored at 5 1/4. I'm using sequins, and these are iridescent sequins from, I've gotten iridescent sequins from Studio Katia and from Neat and Tangled, and love them all. And I'm just putting a bunch of them down. I like to put odd numbers, and I like to sort of lay them down in almost like a triangle shape across the card. And I'm going to go ahead and use my We Are Memory Keepers Quickstik and my multimedia matte glue and attach those to the card. That's going to complete my 4 cards. Over on my blog at stampingimperfection.com, you can find a printable PDF with all the supplies and the exact measurements that you can print, or you can save in a digital file. That will also have links to all of the products. And please give this video a like and share with your friends. Make sure you subscribe to my channel and click the bell so you get updates all the time. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this.